We'll just go.
Oh,
We'll just go. I get, now
we'll go
we're on the internet. We've done it.
again.
Yeah, we've we've achieved it once again. We're back
What?
for the first time in many moons.
Many moons.
Called from beyond to talk shit. I guess.
The die is
Uh,
cast once more because we finally
yes.
have something to talk about. I think
Yes.
is probably the case, isn't it? Um, but first of all, we have to begin this podcast the way we always begin it by
Mm.
me saying, "How are you, Lloyd?"
I'm quite well. Yeah. I've just finished my workday.
Hmm.
Now I am beginning my
Second work
second
day.
workday. Yeah. I've gone from the job that I have to do to the job that I want to do, which is talking shit on the internet with you.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yep.
Putting everything to rights online.
That's it.
Fantastic.
Yep.
Yeah, man.
Um,
So
my brain is goo. It
let
seems.
me
You go.
let's I'll go. So for those of you who are unaware, the other week marked the end of a 4 year long campaign set in Middle Earth. It began in 2016, I think it
Yeah, I
was,
think so.
and it began in Gondor and ended the other day in Orthanc, fighting the forces of Sauron. Um, and we were victorious. But today we're going to talk about the difficult second album and
Yes.
how and how one continues the setting forward when you jump forward a couple of years. But I think it's very important to maintain the Dice Cast tradition for us to begin by debriefing about the game. So, what were your takeaway thoughts from the last session, Lloyd?
I
The
think
last
the
session.
last we had about six last sessions. Um,
We did, yeah.
but the last it felt correct for a Lord of the Rings game to end that way. I think like
Agreed.
uh, you have to have ceremony and singing in Lord of the
Hmm.
Rings. Very
Yes.
important. You
Yes.
can't just be like, and then it's done. You have to show what happened a little bit. Now we didn't do too much of that. I think we like got you coronated, and then we went to the Grey Havens and said goodbye.
Mm.
Um, that was the bulk of it, wasn't it? Oh, we had the council as well. That was
Well,
important.
this was what I enjoyed about it because you had said before we started that session, and to point out, yeah, we did have a lot of last sessions, but I think that probably culminated in the longest battle I've ever taken place in
Mm.
any game, considering it took 4 sessions maybe to
Yeah.
complete the final battle.
Yep.
But then after that, yeah, we had the ending, which was very much an epilogue where we had a sort of sum up of what the characters are left with at the end and where they're going. But there was a moment where a council, a traditional Jarl DM council, was had.
My favorite.
Where, yeah,
Yep.
absolutely. And there's a reason because it's where everyone gets together and they talk about what they want to do, which is fantastic.
Yeah,
Um,
it's the cheat code. If you're a GM, it's a cheat code. You get all your players to sit down and you say, now you're having a council. What do you plan to do? And then they tell you all their plans. And then you can, react and not be taken by too much by surprise. Or at least have a ballpark idea of what's going to happen. I just smacked a lamp. That was good.
that's
Um,
okay. You got to take it out somewhere, Lloyd.
yeah,
It's fine.
show that lamp who's boss. Um, you have this like at least sort of roadmap of what they hope to achieve in the future or whatever. And in this case, it wasn't that because it was the end of the game, but it was like a what will you do in the future? What will the world do in the future? Sort of because there were very big decisions to be made.
There were, yeah, and
Um,
I knew that we were going to sort of talk about roughly what happened, and I was but I was very surprised but also very happy that you put that in the last session. I wasn't entirely prepared for it because we had High Queen Tyrannon of the Dunlendings, who's being shifty ASF.
Yes.
Like she's being like, well, we don't show you any lineage, or we don't have any promises to make to you anymore. You know, we're our own people. And I was like, yeah, I guess like everyone else is.
I think
But
Gondor, or the Reunited Kingdom, is sort of like the UN, you know, of of Middle Earth, and Dunland was having none of it. They were like, actually, no, we'll make our own decisions, thank you. Which I like. I thought that was
me too.
correct.
Me too.
They had just gained a bunch of land and money and power, and they don't want to now be Gondor's vassal.
Yeah, for sure. Well, I mean, just to round off then the debrief. I mean, I was very happy with the ending. I was very emotional. I mean, I'm an emotional human being anyway, but this in particular made me very emotional to send this game off, and it felt right. It felt proper. We had a few songs. We had goodbyes. It turned out that that's what I love. The final decision of the game fell to Caius.
Yes.
And his character Beregond, and he had to decide. The last decision of the game was him deciding whether he remained in Middle Earth or whether he get on a ship. And I've appeared to have collapsed into a corner.
I moved the zoom window to a different monitor, and they did not like that.
It's all good.
Not happy with that decision.
Well, I think that's actually how Faroth felt, because I mean, you rather masterfully spoke of Faroth being surrounded by these governors and advisors. Yeah. He's just like, this is my own personal hell at the end.
Yeah.
But it was fitting, and it was nice that he was left to kingship, because I don't think it would come easy to him.
No, I think Faroth is really good at doing kingly stuff before there's a kingdom. You know? He's good at like leading armies and fighting, and being heroic and sacrificing himself and putting himself in danger and like that sort of stuff.
Yeah.
But he's not good at tedium. He's not good at, well, just allow me to fill out these 600 forms that I need to fill out to give land to all these. Like, there's a lot of that stuff that comes with being a king that I think is not going to be suited to him at all.
No, and that's why, in an effort to sort of give Faroth a bit of an easier time of it, like one of the last things I said as him in character was that every kingdom would govern themselves, because I was thinking of the Shire. The Shire, when in the actual Lord of the Rings, Aragorn leaves the Shire alone to govern them themselves, and I guess they pay a tithe, or whatever. I guess.
Yep.
They didn't really talk about it, did they?
It's extremely unclear how governing works in Middle Earth or in Gondor. I am just destroying
you're just
the whole place.
Such an aggressive podcast. Just fuck this is over. It's done. It's done.
It's unclear how people govern in Middle Earth, because Gondor is a kingdom, but there's a council as well.
Yes.
So maybe it's sort of like a constitutional monarchy, maybe, or something, because the king can't just decree things, I think. But yeah, it's tricky. I sort of thought a lot of the time that it was, I mean, it's feudal. I think there's like the king, and then there's a bunch of lords, and there's lords over them, and then there's knights and whatever. That makes sense to me. That's how you would govern it if you don't have like advanced bureaucracies and stuff like that.
Yeah, something that was news to me was that this because I did a little bit of background in, because I knew we were going to be talking about what happens next and stuff. Faroth, Aragorn, when he becomes king, makes Faramir the new steward, and I didn't realize that there were still stewards when there was a king there. So I guess he's sort of like the political advisor to the king.
Yeah, well, I think it could be like a chancellor or something role, like somebody who does a lot of the tedium, maybe, and the king, the king is the person who makes the big decisions or whatever, or is a figurehead. It's hard to know, but yeah, I guess I would think of it as like a chancellor or like a whatever that job is.
Sure. So there'd be help for him, but I mean, I mean, it's not. It's not entirely important because I think you've already said that you want to move this next game, and I think we should actually start thinking about where we're going with this. Then this next game is going to be how far in the future?
I think it's gonna be 400 years in the future.
400 years in the
I
future.
think so.
Oh, that is a big jump.
You have a question real quick, which is, does a good king equal a good general and vice versa? I don't think so.
No, I mean, I've only got fictional examples, but I always think of Robert Baratheon
Yeah,
from Game of Thrones, excellent at winning wars,
very bad at being a king.
but
Yeah.
really, really bad at
Yeah,
being a
I
king.
think
Yeah.
it can, but they don't. They're not always the same thing. Depends on a lot of things. If the kingdom is really authoritarian and it's got absolute crown authority, then probably a good general will be a good king, because they're used to having people just say yes and doing the thing and giving orders and whatever. And a general is actually rarely doing any fighting. They're like at the very top, looking down, making decisions, organizing people and stuff like that. So those skills are useful in being a king, I think. But being a king is also being a diplomat. It's also being like very aware of things like intrigue and like plots. It's really about like stewardship and like infrastructure, and like all that shit's really important and boring, but really important to like being a good king. Like the good kings are often the ones you don't hear that much about because they just kept the lights on and like
Everything goes fine.
Yeah.
Everything goes fine.
Everything
Nothing
was
goes
fine.
wrong.
Yeah, that's like one of like a good trait for a king to have is nothing fell apart during their reign. You know, like it was all basically fine.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know. I think it depends on a lot of things. I think like if you were a good general, you'll be a good king for orcs or Vikings or
Yeah.
you know, like warlike
races
peoples.
for sure. Yeah.
Will benefit from having a warlike king, but especially in peace times, somebody who came to be king, that's what happens with Robert Baratheon, is he came to be king through war, and then there was peace, and he was like, oh, I don't know how to do any of this.
And he just spent too much money throwing lavish parties because he was bored out of his mind because there wasn't a war on.
Yes.
He got bored.
Right, so 400 years, I think, from where we ended into the future.
Is there a particular reason why it's 400, or is it you just thought you want to distance it enough?
Yes, I just want to distance it enough so that it's not... I don't want anyone around who was around, you know? Except for elves, I guess, but the elves, at least in my head, are mostly gone, almost all of them.
Well, this is something that I felt was important from, and I guess it bridges us quite nicely from our last session in talking about this, because the way that I've tried to start thinking about this is, what have we got left? And that was my question to you, first of all. What state are the elves in? Are all of them gone? Are some of them sticking around?
I think that some have stayed, but I would say 90% of them have gone. And I think the ones that stayed are either living in Lorien or in Mirkwood, Greenwood now, again. And they stayed because they feel a duty to Middle Earth, I think, and to watch and make sure men don't go down some dodgy path or something, you know? So I think it's like some of the elves that stayed made the sacrifice to stay, and they think it's like their job to stay and make sure everything's okay, you know?
So the last wardens, as it were.
Yeah, exactly. I think other than that, they all went. They don't want to be in Middle Earth anyway anymore, most of them. And then Galadriel's dead, so you know
which was a blow and a half.
Yeah, what's the point for loads of them if she's gone? You know, Elrond's Eld, he's gone. You know, and like a lot of the royalty and the like nobility and stuff would be gone. I think a lot of the rank and file elves, would be just making their way over to the west.
Okay, that's interesting.
I think dwarves are more out than
Mhm.
they have been before, because they got back a lot of their kingdoms through the war. They got Gundabad and they got Erebor. And I think in the years that follow, they would take back Moria.
Yeah.
And because of how much the dwarves fought in the war, there are better ties with men. And so I think there's reason to think that instead of retreating further in, they come further out. So
That's really cool.
I thought about there being a republic in Dale, which is a dwarfish and mannish republic.
Nice.
But not a kingdom. So Thorin's son or grandson, maybe, decided, actually, we spend so much time with these people and they're contributing so much to this as well that we can make a council and we can all work together on it or something, you know? I thought
Okay.
that at least. I think then in the Blue Mountains, it'll be Gurney's people still, but they'll be trading a lot with Arnor that's over there. And Moria, I don't know yet who goes there or what happens there. Maybe it's Gimli. I don't know.
It would have to be, that would be their first major victory. If it's just the dwarves on their own retaking it, that would be like their first
Yeah.
big battle after the major battle that happened at the last session. For sure. We're talking about how we do this. What do you feel has informed your decision about the dwarves? Is it solely taken from what's happened in previous games? Is that what you're basing this on, or is this from what you want to have happen, so it helps you later on? Or
sort of both. I sort of want Middle Earth to change enough that it's new in some ways, and I want there to be evidence of the fact that everyone fought together in this last battle and that was important and it did change the world. And without Sauron, and without like some dark evil force, people can like really do some shit, you know? They can really get together and like fix things and make things and stuff, and I want to see that in the world. And I think without the influence of Sauron, which is kind of everywhere the whole time, like you have less people who are, you know, Thorin, like, where he's like, I will not part with a single coin. You know?
Yeah.
You have way more people who are like, oh, actually, those men like grow our food and, you know, and are more willing to sort of look at alliances in a more meaningful way. That's part of it. I also like dislike the idea that the dwarves are like always just like greedily digging for things and like are hiding away and like,
and they don't learn. That's the problem, isn't it? They're just like, no, we'll just keep digging, and then eventually they never come back up.
I think it might be cool if like Thorin's son was like, you know what we should not do is go all the way down, because that never works actually, you know.
Curious question, just because I want to know, not because it's entirely important, I don't imagine, but Smaug, what happened there?
Dealt with somehow.
Oh, okay.
I don't know how.
Oh, okay.
It might be similar. It would have to be one of those arrows probably, or it was after the war here, a lot of the dwarves went up and got it or something. But yeah, I think
Sure.
dealt with. Yeah.
Out of the way.
Yeah.
Cool. Okay, well that's dwarves. The next one that has me quite concerned really is Rohan. Rohan, as it was where we left it, was in absolute ruins. The Rohirrim were down to a couple of hundred. What's their story? Where are they after 400 years?
Yeah, that's tricky because Queen Morwenna swore fealty to Gondor, the Reunited Kingdom, because there were only like, I think I said 2,000 Rohirrim left.
Something like that, yeah.
Because the Easterlings just walked in and killed everybody, and nobody came to help them in time. So they were just ruined, and I think like there are a lot of people now, 400 years later in Gondor, who are like, we should be our own nation. Why don't we have full citizen rights in the Reunited Kingdom and stuff like that, because they're a vassal or whatever, you know? So if I think of it like Gondor is Rome and they're like Greece, you know, and they're like, oh, but can we not just make our own decisions? Why don't we have a king? Why don't, you know? we have this royal line sort of thing. So when I thought about it before, I had thought there had been several rebellions like rising up in Rohan, and they were crushed by Gondor. So
there's been war between them then.
Yeah, because I think
Ooh.
after that many hundreds of years, a lot of that stuff is forgotten, and it's like, oh well, you are,
100%,
you
yeah.
are our vassal. You don't get to make those decisions. So like, Farroth's grandson doesn't remember the fact that Queen Morwenna like personally fought in those battles, or
And Farroth
and
said,
what they
"I
sacrificed.
will look out for your
Yeah.
interests." That's forgotten.
Yes,
That's
yep.
rough, man. Oh,
Yep, it's the way of it, I guess.
so yeah.
So I think like Rohan as a sort of rebel nation, trying to get independence from Gondor, but I think that Rohan is sort of like maybe the breadbasket of Gondor. It's all fields and stuff. They probably make a lot of food, and that's the other thing that I do, which Tolkien doesn't do a lot, is I think about, look at the map of Middle Earth, and I think about what would you do in each place? What are they making? How are they rich? How are they
surviving?
How are they surviving? You know. Yeah, so I think Rohan is a rebel nation.
So they are not aligned to Gondor when we return. They are at odds. They are at war, or
I don't
at
think
least
at
hostile.
war, but not even hostile, because Rohan has fought maybe like 3 times to try and get themselves free and have lost each time. But I think there's a lot of like anti-Gondor sentiment in Rohan, and a lot of like young lads who are like, we can get it back, we can change it, you know.
Yeah,
a lot of that sort of thing.
That's very interesting. Okay, I like that a lot, actually. Okay, well, that's Rohan. What have Dunland been doing?
Growing unstoppably, I think. They built that big port with Gondorian stone.
Yep.
Which is a big deal. There's no ports over there except for the Grey Havens.
Yeah.
And I think that they have become a queendom, and they are hassling Rohan occasionally. Rohan are weak, you know, comparatively still. I think there's been wars between them as well.
That might be one of the reasons why they were never able to make any impact against Gondor. They could probably use their cavalry, if they have any cavalry now, to beat them in the field. But if they're constantly worried about what Dunland's doing on their other side, then they're never going to get any headway, are they?
Yep. I also think maybe that Dunland is like starting rebel sentiment in Gondor, like spreading that and like encouraging that to keep them weak, you know, keep Rohan weak. That sort of thing. That's what I would do if I was the Queen of Dunland. I would send people into Rohan and be like, you know what's bullshit? You don't get proper stuff. And they're like, yeah, that's what I would do. Keep them against each other, you know?
Absolutely, yeah. You want to keep those hostilities stoked, for sure.
Yeah. I think Cole asked about technological advancements and improvements, and I think like broadly no, because Middle-earth has been there for like 10,000 years and nothing's really changed technology-wise. I think arguably something about gunpowder, maybe, like late medieval, because Saruman had discovered it and it was, you know, used in stuff like that. But I don't want there to be guns in Middle-earth, really.
No.
It doesn't feel right. But I do think, like specifically, Dunland will have sort of aged out of tribal into feudal, you know, so they were very much Celts, like
very much so,
living in the hills,
scratching and living off rocks.
Murderers. So yeah, I think they have sort of become more feudal and more like Gondor, I think, because Gondor's army is probably the best in the world now, and they would look at that and go, we can do that, the way people looked at Roman legions and went, we can make those, and then they can't really. But you know, sort of aping a lot of that stuff. They're not great sailors. That's what Gondor is. They're the best sailors. So, but they try, I think, and I think they would invest heavily in trading southwards and stuff. because there's Umbar, which is the current city where the Corsairs come from in the movies, pirates. Um, that was originally a Numenorian city, and I think that the first thing Faroth does is take that city back.
100%.
Because Faroth needs a war to keep himself occupied, and I think
Yep.
that one is one that makes sense.
Yeah.
Because it's firstly like a really wealthy city. It's like got a massive port, and it's like in the south, and you get all the spices and all that sort of stuff. But also, it's like traditional Numenorian homeland.
Mhm.
I think it makes sense to take it back.
What do you reckon that? How do you reckon that war played out? Was it a good move for him to do that? Were there costs? Well, I basically want to know what their Umbar's position is
I
400
think
years down the
he
line.
was told to approach them diplomatically, and
Which he offered to do for
yeah.
sure. Yeah.
And I think that they were like, well, no, we're actually independent. We're our own city. We don't want to join. And that wasn't acceptable,
Hmm.
I think. It's difficult because I don't think Faroth would just declare a war of conquest. You know, he's not that kind of person. So there needs to be a reason
fought,
why.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah, he's fought a war of defense
Mhm.
to survive complete annihilation of everything. Yeah, so he wouldn't for sure. But I mean, at the same time, he would have memories of what was going on in Rohan. He saw how many people got slaughtered by the armies of the East. You know, he's seen what happens if that gets out of hand. So there is that fear that would play on his mind quite a lot, I imagine. So
Mhm.
it wouldn't take that much convincing, I don't think.
Yeah, so it's tricky. I guess for some reason that happens. I mean, it might not be Faroth. There might be a king after him.
That's true. I mean,
know?
it might have happened way later. You're right. Yeah.
I think the priority Faroth might be Mordor, which is now just orcs. And
I was going to say Mordor to the end.
Yeah. Okay, we'll get to that at the end. But yeah, that's what I think Dunland is doing. Growing. They've become quite powerful in their own right. I think they might have conquered up a little bit. There was a war maybe 100 years after Faroth was made king where they took a little chunk of land to the north or something, or to the south, or just a little thing somewhere. Because Gondor is so powerful and there's no other like nations that are so powerful, I don't think they're losing many wars. But they could be losing land to rebellion. They could be losing land to things like little border wars that happen because their army is in a different place. You know, if you send the bulk of the Gondorian army into Mordor to like whatever deal with orcs and stuff, and then you can't defend all the parts that are like way to the east or whatever.
What
You know?
about would Arnor be in a position to help? Are they still Arnor? Have they just completely consolidated with the Kingdom of Gondor?
I think that they're the same kingdom.
Okay.
They're the reunited kingdom. So there's probably a king in Minas Tirith, and then there's probably like the heir goes and rules in Anúminas. You know, something like that. I would say.
One thing that does very excite me about a fourth age game is to see what would happen with the kingdoms in the north, because we've only ever seen them as like a ruin of once was there. You know,
Yes.
we've not ever seen them functioning other than ranging parties desperately trying to defend it from like wraiths and orcs and stuff. So
because I think like if and Faroth is from Arnor, isn't he? Like he's from the north.
yeah.
So I think he would invest heavily in rebuilding Anúminas and like reinforcing that part of the reunited kingdom. Might even make sense for Faroth to declare the capital as Anúminas and not Minas Tirith.
Well, that's what I was going to ask.
Yeah.
Would they even be over there?
Yeah, it's worth considering. That's his home, and that's where Anarion founded and stuff. So definitely possible.
I mean, at the same time, though, I think he would have a certain amount of not pressure, but obligation to keep up the tradition that was there before. So it is
Yes.
tricky. Or would
I think
he?
it's possible to change it, like where the capital is.
Mm,
Um, the thing is, if there's also an invasion into Mordor, that puts the capital so far east compared to where Mordor is. Really, it should be like in the middle where Isengard is. You
maybe it
know?
wouldn't make sense then, because you're right, with the looming threat of the East. I said looming threat. Like there's just a threat of the East. Perhaps it
Yeah.
wouldn't make sense to do that then.
Hmm.
And I do like that. I mean, the one thing that I did want that I was able to suggest in the game was to have Orthanc become like a place
Yes.
where everyone can sort of gather. Have you had any thoughts about that at all?
I thought maybe it could become a kind of university. Um,
Oh, that's a great
you know,
idea. Yeah,
there isn't
yeah.
really a central place for learning in Middle Earth, um, where the different free peoples pool information.
Mm,
And that's because they all don't trust each other, but they sort of do now. So I thought maybe it would be cool if there was like a central place for learning where a dwarf can learn to heal and a man can learn to forge runes and whatever, like things like that.
where they share from different people's
Yeah,
cultures.
exactly, for the good of everyone, sort
Mm.
of.
Oh,
It's
that's a great idea.
yeah. Yeah, I think like you could have, I don't know, a like neutral body of people who go and study there, and like they're also diplomats and they're also like teachers and stuff like that, who like go around making sure nobody forgets the alliances and stuff. Kind of
Mm.
like Gandalf and Saruman, except more of them but not wizards.
Will there be an order known as the Heralds, named after
Yeah.
when they work from there, when they work for the
Yes.
university?
Like
Yeah.
that. Yeah. Yeah.
Cool. I like that very much.
Yeah. I think that's definitely something.
Okay. Well, it is the elephant in the room, or the elephant in the room, so we should probably talk about it. Orcs. What's going on with
Yes.
them?
What is a good question.
Because, as written, once the evil of Sauron is dismissed or destroyed or whatever, the orcs pale and disappear and are no more. But I don't think that's the
No.
case in this game, is it?
No. Definitely not. Um I the game Shadow of War and Shadow of Mordor have like really great characterful orcs.
Absolutely. They steal the show.
Yeah,
100%.
absolutely, definitely. And I think there's no reason to remove this like really characterful, interesting enemy people from the game and from the
Hmm.
world. And I did a lot of in Against the Shadow, sort of reinforcing that orcs have culture and that they are a people. They've been misled, maybe, and twisted by Sauron, and many of them are like psychotic and evil and cruel. But also, they've poetry, they've got philosophy. Like they do think about these things, and they are, intelligent and like self-aware and things like that. So I think
Yep.
without,
As we saw in Mythadras, which was something that really took us aback, because it had been hinted at that there were other kinds of orcs and things, but then we learned firsthand that there were orcs that were having discussions about the older ways of Middle Earth, and they had libraries in Mythadras and
yep,
philosophizing. That was very interesting. I think I
yeah,
was up there in par with. There was a moment in when we were defending Rohan. There was a moment where the Easterlings were humanized, and we'd captured some Easterlings, and it was that whole Faramir speech. Was it like
yeah.
what you know?
Is he so different from,
Is
or
he so
what
different?
lies and whatever brought him here? And
Yeah, yeah.
yeah, that's really important to me. Like that's one of my favorite, or like I think one of the most important parts of Lord of the Rings is when Faramir like kills those Easterlings. He like looks at them and goes, "These are also people."
Yeah,
Because it's really rare in Lord of the Rings that anyone says these are also people. Um, but Faramir like notices it and is like, well, it could be me going into their lands, pushed by the king or something. Um, and that would also be awful. And maybe they don't get to make the decision themselves.
yeah. So, with all that said, then, so the orcs, they're still around. Have they developed their own cities, civilizations in 400 years. The orcs are very industrious, as we know. What have they been up to?
Good question. I think that they're pushed out of most of Mordor. Because I have this sort of idea that Gondor retakes Minas Ithil, Minas
Ithil,
Morgul,
yeah.
and pushes on as far as Barad-dûr and takes that. And like, well, what's left of it, pushes all the way there and like, then establishes the Vigil, which is a mass exodus or like people who move into Mordor to live there and protect it and make sure that there's nothing rising there.
Right. Do they try and make use of the land? Like, are they trying to grow things or mine things there? Yeah.
Yep, definitely. I think like they can, they live a hard life and there's probably like a wall built or something. I think there's a big lake. I think it's called the Nirn in Mordor. There's a massive lake.
Something like that, isn't it? Yeah.
And the land there isn't blasted and hellish and whatever. It's just like around Barad-dûr and like those volcanic lands and stuff that are black and ashen and awful. And I think a lot of that would sort of like get less and less as the years go on when there's no Barad-dûr and no like malign influence of Sauron and the Nazgul and stuff. Mm-hmm. So people are trying to make that land livable and scratch a living off rocks there, and then I think the orcs would have gone either into the mountains under them or east into where Nirn is. Nirnen?
Yes, it's something like that, isn't it? Yeah.
But I don't think the orcs are just gone. That's boring and not interesting.
Agreed.
I do think it's worth considering that maybe there are orcs who like are going, hey, we get it. We did a lot of bad things, but could we talk about it?
Can we just talk about this just for a moment?
Like, not all of them. I think the vast majority of orcs are going to be like, well, these guys are evil. We're going to eat them.
Mm-hmm.
But I think there is a way of looking at Lord of the Rings, which I don't really agree with, but there is a way of looking at it that Sauron represents industrialization and like forward thinking and progress. He is sort of like an equal opportunity employer in that anyone can serve Sauron. He doesn't give a shit who you are or what you are. So there is a way of looking at it like that.
Well, with the Exodus, I imagine a lot of them pushed east. So now a problem that the East have to deal with, but I imagine they might see the orcs as friends, where the West is kind of vigilant in saying that they're enemies.
Yep.
And then that's a problem.
Yeah. I think it would be cool to have a conclave of orcs somewhere that are like trying to be a part of the free peoples of Middle Earth. Maybe it's the guys in Methedras or somewhere else, but like somewhere where there are like orcs that are partially learned and who don't want to fight anymore. Something like that might be worth thinking about.
Well, I think the fact, it was confirmed. We'd heard about it for a while, and then it was confirmed when we faced, I can't remember his name, sadly, but there was that really wicked orc who was the leader in Methadras, and he didn't look like normal orcs.
No,
he was kind of like an elite, almost elven version of an orc.
Yes.
Super intelligent, super powerful. I imagine those from Methadras would be the front runners, that kind of orc, the front runners of leading a civilization like that, perhaps.
Like, I wonder if it's worth considering that like there are the ancient orcs who are traditionalist and they worship Sauron like a god, and they have no interest in joining with the free peoples, but there are many millions of orcs who are like, hey, we keep dying and fighting, and now Sauron's not even going to like turn us to goo if we don't. Like, can we just stop?
Yeah, self-preservation's kicked in. Mm-hmm. Like, we're sick of these rangers like hounding us, keeping us moving. Yeah, everywhere we go. Yeah, even after 400 years, they're still being vilified, and most of those orcs will have been killed. And the new orcs are thinking, "Well, this is all we've ever known is is
Yeah,
persecution.
we're being
Yeah,
persecuted for things we weren't even there for.
we weren't
You know?
even there for. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, that's worth thinking about for sure. I don't know the answer to that question yet, but I do want to look at orcs in a way that makes them a little bit more human, or
3-dimensional at
yeah,
least.
three
Yeah.
dimensional. They're not
Yeah.
just all like, "Ugh, I'm going to kill you, mate, you fuck," you know.
Some of them will.
Some of them will, plenty of them will, yeah, but not all of them.
Okay. Are there any other cultures that we've missed?
So there's Dale, but I think I'm pretty keen on them being the Republic of Dale Erebor, or Erebor Dale or something, or of the Lake or something, you know.
Okay.
And there's the Easterlings, and the Haradrim and the Riders of Rune, or the Wayne Riders of Rune. The three brown cultures, basically, that always get shafted in Lord of the Rings. So that's a big question, because the world is really big, actually, Middle Earth. It goes like way further east than we know. And I sort of established the Easterlings as sort of like a Persian empire who were misled. They thought that Sauron was Anatar the Golden and that he was a sort of god king, and in all ways he was that, you know. They never saw the evil of it. They actually, most of them had never seen an orc, you know. So they were under the impression that they were led by a god king, and that whatever. That's not the case, so they had to rethink a lot of things, but
I just always imagine these vast sweeping golden halls with lines of Oliphants like being driven through massive sandstone cities. Like there's a whole other side we've never seen.
Yeah, I do think there's an empire back there, you know, and it's powerful and it's not messing around, and it's certainly not bowing to Gondor.
No, I'm afraid you say that.
Yeah, so I think like they're the geopolitical enemy, because the orcs aren't like a global threat anymore, and they're not a threat to Gondor as an entity, but the Easterlings are. I think the Haradrim are, potentially. They're in the south, in the deserts. That's sort of Africa. That's sort of the Middle East. And again, like, they have their own culture and they have their own empire down there. And I think, like, again, they're not just going to also roll over and be like, oh yeah, you're the king of Gondor, great, you're our king now. Like, it's not going to happen. So then it's a question of like, does Gondor make friends with them and try and trade with them, or how that works, you know?
Yeah. And is there anyone else, or does that cover it for in terms of who we're working with here?
I think that's everybody.
Now, I know that you're familiar with it, but other people might not be. There was an attempt by Tolkien to write a sequel to The Lord of the Rings, tentatively called The New Shadow. But he gave up on it because he didn't like the idea of dealing with just a world of men. I think he called it sinister and disturbing. And the main thrust of the plot was that there was a I think it was like a cult toward that worship the dark tree. In the mythology, there's the tree of light and there's the tree of darkness, or whatever. I suppose what I want to ask of you really is like, is that something that bothers you, that we are now we're moving into a Middle Earth that is now slowly losing all the things that traditionally makes Middle Earth, like elves? And I mean, like you said, the dwarves are still going to be part of it, which I think is a solid move. The orcs, I just want to know your thoughts on it, really.
Yeah, it's I think like you do lose the elves, which are such a huge part of Middle Earth and one of the coolest, probably the coolest depiction of elves in any media. I think like that's rough. That's why I have this like last Wardens thing.
Wow.
I also would want the villain to be an elf. There's that song that Caius always sings about Gilgalad, where he vanishes. He goes into Mordor and never comes back.
Yeah.
I think that would, because an elf lord is almost, you know, it is very supernatural, and it's almost powerful as like a wizard or whatever, probably more so in some cases, you know.
And I think would be off the chain against someone who's then now growing at 400 years later, and like these are now legends. It's like a
Yeah.
legendary creature just rocking up.
Yep. So I had thought
You know,
about Gilgalad, who was like grabbed by Sauron and burnt, and then returned, and is bitter and hateful, and maybe now has like sided with Melkor
Ooh.
and something like that, working to rise people up in the east and the orcs and stuff, and try and do something um, in that direction, maybe.
I think we're blessed with no shortage of villains. The other one that jumps to my mind is that we left a blue wizard within the jail of the Blue Mountains.
Yes,
But there was obviously two blue wizards, and
there
we
was
only met
another.
one.
Yep.
Yeah,
Yep, very true.
so they're kicking around somewhere. Maybe who knows?
Yeah, I mean, there's plenty of baddies to make. I think like it is sad to not have the elves, but I had thought that as part of the elves leaving, that there was a way to create half elves. I don't know how to do that without it being eugenics, you know? um, because I don't want like to breed super mentions or whatever, like
That's effectively what
Ubermensch.
happens, though.
It
That's what
is.
happens.
Yep, it is.
Aragon's child is a half elf,
Yep. And I think like
and
that's
that's what we set up in our game. Was that was the intention. Faroth
mm,
married Laniel from Mirkwood,
yep. And I think then if you have
so
others in Gondor or Arnor, like Dunedain and elves making, babies, then then you could have this like half elf, because like Elrond's half elf, and he lived for 5,000 years or more, So how half of an elf you are is unclear.
yeah.
If you are born a half elf, how it seems like you're more elf than man, for sure. Um,
That really excites me actually, because we're actually dealing with, we've obviously learning and discussing what happens with the established races of Middle Earth. What we're going to do with a brand new one. That's,
yeah,
well, sort of brand new anyway. Like you say, there are questions to answer about what exactly they are, but that's a whole new culture born right there.
yep. Like if I think about it, I would think they're the ruling class or whatever. They're sort of born to that. The king is
Mm.
always going to be like a half elf. The whatever, because they're going to have so many years to perfect their skills and learn all this stuff. It makes sense that they would be in charge. But then you have this like weird, like ethnic caste system where like the half elves are in charge, and so it's tricky because if you apply any sort of real world sense to it, you end up with like an ethno state where the elves are in charge and the men are like subservient, and like that's
Well,
not
that's why I
great.
was thinking. No wonder Rohan are kicking off. Fucking
Yeah.
hell! There's like these superhuman individuals that rule over everyone else and like have a different bloodline. Oh my
Yeah.
god!
Yeah, so it's tricky in that respect, like but I do want there to be elvish traditions and elves in the game.
Hmm.
So I think maybe some half elf thing can occur,
And I think, despite everything, I think you're right to keep. There's still a bloodline,
Yes.
because
It's
that's something
such a
that's
big
always
thing in
been
Lord of the
through. It's
Rings.
so huge,
Yeah.
and it has so much weight and power behind it that it counts for a lot. And I think it's good that it would still exist in these new entities.
Yeah.
Oh my god! Right.
Yeah.
Well, we've covered that. I suppose my next question is, we're bringing this setting forward, and we're bringing this forward because there's, for new games now, The Hobbit, The Lord of the Rings, and Against the Shadow, inspired by them, was effectively a road trip game. It was a journey. I don't know if you intended it to be at the very start, but
Mhm.
it then evolved into this game where we would visit different cultures to try and get them to side with us to defend against Sauron. Is this going to be another one of those? Is it going to be a journey? And if that's the case, what would the journey be? Would we go east? What would it be?
Yeah, I don't know.
Oh, okay.
I don't really know yet. I think Lord of the Rings is about journeys. So is The Hobbit. It's like the narrative of these stories is you go to a place you're not expecting to go, and you learn something on the way, you know? So I think like it could certainly be uh there's something rising, some shadow, some evil is rising, and you have to go and deal with it. Um, or it could be, you know, it could be any number of things. You're in Rohan and you're oppressed, start a rebellion and save Rohan. It could be, you know, you're this ruling elven class and you have to like go and take care of the diplomacy. I don't really want it to be like a an Iscloft or like a Game of Thrones where you're managing an estate, or like a that doesn't feel right in Lord of the Rings. I don't think you don't want to be
Agreed.
burdened with, well, I have this many sheep this week, and so therefore, like, it doesn't. They never talk about that at all, you know.
No, agreed.
In Lord of the Rings, so I think it has to be an adventure
Hmm.
in like a classic sense, you know.
Yeah.
But yeah, so I don't know exactly. It would be part of the big sessions era to discuss like what everybody wants from the game, and what's interesting. Is it fighting orcs again? Is it like exploring the east? Is it whatever? You know, figure it out. But I don't know for sure yet.
Is there anything that has, and you don't have to spoil it because obviously you're going to be running this at some point, but have you had any sort of musings about what you would want to include?
I have thoughts about advancing the world in a way that I don't know if it makes sense for Middle Earth. In 400 years of peace, Gondor
Mm,
could do so much stuff. Um,
yeah.
like they could, because I noticed the other day that like on the map of Middle Earth, there's the Anduin, and on the eastern side of the Anduin, there's the Brown Lands, and those are colossal. They're like as big as Gondor, and
You
they're
remember because we had to ride
empty.
across them and it was miserable because
There's
we were dying.
nothing there. It's like fucking 2,000 square miles, and there's nothing there. It makes zero sense to me that there's nothing. So if I'm the king of Gondor and I have near infinite resources at my command, do I not like reroute part of the Anduin and irrigate those lands or something?
Smart,
You know,
very smart.
that's something I thought about. But is that too big of an industrial or like of a infrastructure development for Middle Earth? Like they have the technology. I know that they have that because they built Minas Tirith and they built like all these places. So it's definitely possible. But like, would they do it? Could they do it? I don't know. But it makes sense to me that you would expand. Those lands are empty, basically.
Throughout our many discussions about Lord of the Rings and throughout many discussions that other people have had about Lord of the Rings, it is, like you've said, sort of like the advent of industry. So it makes sense that now we're 400 years in, we're seeing that industry
Mhm.
and it butting heads with the old world.
Yeah,
So I
because
don't, I,
there's
it's
another
perfectly fine
reading
to
that
me.
like the elves are like the old agricultural lord system, and that Sauron is the industrial revolution or something.
Yeah,
With no elves around to be like, no, you shouldn't do that. Like men can just develop and make things, you know, without thinking if they should.
yeah.
I also thought about to the east of the Brownlands, there's a small mountain range that connects to the mountains of Mordor, and there's a gap that's maybe like 10 or 20 miles. And I thought if I was Faroth or the King of Gondor, I'd build a wall there, um, and declare that's the edge of Gondor. You know, um,
Yeah.
I would make an alliance with the Republic of Dale and Erebor,
Mhm.
and I would have them guard that section of it, and then anything south of there I guard as Gondor. Um, and just make sure that everyone together is like, okay, listen, there's a really big empire over there. And if they wanted to fight us, it would be bad for everybody. So let's just keep an eye on the border, kind of thing.
Mhm.
Um, so I thought about a big wall, a big like development, some new construction that's impressive. Because everything Lord of the Rings that we see is ancient and built forever ago, and it's always been there. So it would be cool to see something new that was built. I mean, it'll still be
New.
old to you when you play. You know, it won't have been built a week ago. It'll still be like 200 years ago, but
Yeah.
still, you know, comparatively new for Lord of the Rings.
That's a very interesting point because we're definitely having our cake and eating it there because we get to develop and have new wonders of the world that we see, giant walls and new versions of the Argonath or whatever, but obviously they're still ancient to the characters that will be in the game. I think that's
Yeah.
amazing.
Yeah, so that's sort of the thoughts that I have. I think the Men of the Vigil will be in Mordor, and they'll be taking care of that. And I think you would probably have a frontier or something in the Brownlands, as far as the wall, men just expanding in all directions, and maybe other like the dwarves are like, oh, okay, maybe slow down on that a little bit. I think nobody messes with Greenwood the Great, like Mirkwood. Nobody's felling it or taking it down. Fangorn too. I think Lorien is like a sacred site, and that's maybe where the wardens are. The elves, they just stay in there and they whatever, maybe there's like one elven advisor in Minas Tirith always, something like that,
Maybe there's a new forest. They planted the new forest to hunt in. Maybe they decided, well, we can't cut down any of the trees over there because they're all sacred. So let's plant a new forest so we can cut that down. Very interesting. One culture, I guess, we didn't cover, and I'm just remembering now. Hobbits.
They're just having a nice time in the Shire, I think.
They're still okay?
I think so. Like, there's no reason for anyone to hassle them, and they don't hassle anybody. So I think, like, they might have like agreements now with Arnor, since that's back, of providing nice food and weed to Arnor.
Dealers in Middle Earth.
Yeah. I think like that's something, but I don't know. Like, I never think of hobbits on like a geopolitical scale because there's so few of them and they're tiny and they can't really win a war or like fight a war. They're surrounded by people who are so much more powerful than them.
So they're just doing their own thing.
Yeah, I think that there are men in the north, maybe. Like, you go north of Arnor, there's those lands there, Angmar and stuff, where the Witch King was. He's gone.
Yeah.
There's things up there. There has to be people and things and whatever. So maybe there's some northerly mannish race up there.
I think that would make sense.
Yeah.
Not all of them would have fallen in line with a new kingdom of Arnor, I don't think.
No, I think you could definitely have as well, like, some of the Dunedain or just people who lived in Arnor who were like, well, actually, we'd rather be independent and live our weird nomad life. And,
We're used to being nomads now, yeah.
Yeah, I think that's something to consider too.
Okay.
Yeah.
Big question. Orcs, playable characters?
I don't know. I think with the group that we have, I would allow it, yeah. I think I wouldn't allow it with anybody, but it's... yeah, I don't know. I think it's tricky because then there's so much that has to be established about them.
Yeah.
Before we even start, which is tricky.
Just something I'd put out there.
Could be cool though.
Well, that's it. I mean, I always go back to when we were playing Jade Horde, and there was that excellent dynamic where the orcs were, enemies, but a working relationship had to be made, and that relationship was being developed. So, I mean, to have a playable character as an orc, I think might help that. But at the same time,
it could be really cool. Yep.
It could be a great hindrance if we're trying to, be diplomatic and.
Yeah, I think
it depends what the game is, really, doesn't it? It depends.
That movie Bright, where there's like an
orc
cop
orc cops,
very ham-fisted, but like I think there's something maybe to like, okay, we are integrating orcs into our society. This is the thing, But then you kind of just have to like role play racism for the whole campaign, which is also not great, Like,
not great.
Because then you get like every dwarf ever who's like, I will not deal with an orc in my hall or whatever,
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know.
I think that wraps up my questions that I had. I have no Dark Tree Cult. That was from New Shadow. Vague questions about magic. Is there magic? other than what
Is
elves
there
had?
magic? That's a good question.
Is there any magic surviving in the line of kings as
I
it
thought
lies?
about yes. Well, I mean, magic, as in what Gandalf and Saruman do. I don't know.
Hmm.
I don't think they learned that. I think they are that.
Yeah,
So I don't know that
yeah,
you can like study how to be a wizard. Um,
yeah. I agree. Yeah, because there is that weird class in the book, isn't there, where it's sort of is it
yeah,
what's it called? Is it a
um,
scholar or
a
a
mystic or something, scholar. Yeah, I don't know. I don't think. I mean, obvious magic has never really been something that I associate with Middle Earth, except for like the actual wizards who were, and there are
Hmm,
five of them, or six of them or whatever. So like, I don't really like that so much, but I do think it's like worth considering that orcs have magic. Um, at least they do in Shadow of Mordor. Some of them have like dark magic and stuff, and I think that would be cool.
necromancy?
Yeah,
Yeah,
that
because
could be interesting.
necromancy is definitely a thing.
Yes.
It just isn't covered. Werewolves are a thing,
Mm-hmm.
and vampires. Don't see them in Lord of the Rings or The
No.
Hobbit, but they're out there
Yeah, they're
somewhere.
in the Silmarillion somewhere. Yeah, I think like it could be cool to have the ability to learn magic. Maybe not for players, because
Agreed.
then we have to like create a magic system to put into Middle Earth, and like that's more than it's worth. But I think it could be worth considering that in 400 years, orcs could have sort of this,
They could have mastered
conceptualized and like
something, sure. Yeah,
created a
yeah.
kind of magic. Yeah.
I'm looking in the chat to see if we have any questions. Cole Spark says, "Will there have been technological improvements?" Well, I suppose you sort of touched on that with the black powder and new construction.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't know. Like the black powder thing is tricky because if you add guns into Middle Earth, it's immediately very different. Um,
Hmm.
if you add cannons, then suddenly a lot of the fortresses are way less fortressy. Um, I don't know. Could be interesting though. There's a lot of I don't know, basically, and I think a lot of that will come like through running the game and through playing it. That's what happened with Against the Shadow too. Like I didn't know all those things were going to happen. A lot of that kind of
Sure,
came up through playing.
definitely.
Um,
Yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
I think I established that you can play as like Dunlendings, Rohirrim, Men
Hmm.
of Gondor, Men of Arnor, Men of the Vigil,
The visual, yeah, that'd be
uh,
an interesting one. Yeah.
and then the half elf people, whatever they are,
Whatever they are.
whatever they are, and maybe like some southerner or something. That could be interesting.
Some of them are.
Like if you're from
Some
Umbar,
northerner. Yeah, yeah.
like Umbar is a city that belongs to Gondor now, so you are
That's true.
part
Yeah.
of the free people of Middle Earth, but you have different traditions and stuff. That might be interesting.
Yeah, there's so much. There's so
Mhm.
much to think about.
Yeah.
Keel, our fellow against the Shadower, has said perhaps there would be two capitals, a practical one and a ceremonial one. I think that's a good
Mhm.
idea.
Yep. So there's one like Numinos might be where the coronations take place and where like whatever. And a lot of like royal families do like a summer residence and a winter residence and stuff like that. That could make sense too. You don't want to
Yeah,
be in a Numinos in the winter. It's like way up north and cold.
yeah, definitely. Oh my god, the absolute misery. Um, yeah. Well, I mean, I guess that sort of just sets us up
That's
ready
it.
for a session zero, really, doesn't it?
Yep, I think so.
I've got to say I'm super excited about it. Like there's enough there where it's familiar, but plenty where it's completely new
Yeah.
and
Yep.
very exciting.
I think it's going to be interesting. I'll probably give it a break for a bit, a couple of weeks at least, before I jump back in because you don't want to finish a campaign and then be like, and now let's do another one.
Yeah, I
Yeah,
agree.
without giving it some time and being like, man, that was good. So
Absolutely.
you give it
Yeah,
some time and whatever. But I am working towards it and thinking about it and stuff. So we will get there.
definitely, man. Well, I've enjoyed this conversation very much.
Yes.
And
Thank you for your wonderful questions. Very useful.
Thank you for humoring me and telling me about your your thought process. Well, I don't think it's easy, is it? Especially when you're thinking about an established setting as well. Like
Yeah,
it's what feels right. And I think if you know a setting like you do with Middle Earth, I mean, you have an instinct for that, don't you? But
that's one
it's
of the
still a
harder.
process of you working that out still.
That's one of the harder parts is keeping the flavor and the themes of Middle Earth and also advancing them is really difficult
Mm,
because a lot of Middle Earth is about not advancing and like has a lot of really old ideas like bloodlines being super important and racism just a fact of life and things like that that maybe aren't great and I would like to see less of um, if we can manage it, you know. Um, so then integrating things like orcs, you have to think about how many hundreds of years would it take for people to stop hating orcs for being orcs, you know?
yeah,
Would it ever
it's rough.
happen? You know, like yeah, so that's worth thinking about and that's difficult. And then it's also like the other thing is about flavor. You know, is Gondor going to irrigate a whole massive area of the world and build up new cities and stuff? Like that would make sense. If I was the king of Gondor and I had peace, I would do that. Public works and stuff for sure. But it doesn't feel very Lord of the Rings in some ways, you know?
Yeah, I know what you mean.
Yeah,
It's
it's
weird, isn't
tricky.
it?
Yeah.
The idea of any new structure of any kind
Yeah.
was sort of warped my mind for a bit, but then I thought, no, that's actually cool, and it wouldn't be new
No.
in the time period that we're
Wouldn't be
playing,
new to
so it
you anymore,
works.
yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
amazing, man.
Cool. Very good. Okay,
Spot on.
that's it.
Thanks for watching.
Keep shouting. All right. Bye.